been sent to the scene.
OK, we'll take a look at today's papers now. We're joined by Dr Liam Lenten, a sports economist at La Trobe University. Liam, good morning.
Morning, Virginia. Good morning, Michael.
And when the papers went to bed last night, the mining tax hadn't been formally passed, but most people were pretty confident that it would be.
Absolutely. So I anticipate that there'll be more in the papers tomorrow about this one. But for now, a lot of the major dailies, and by the way, there was a lot of state-based stories in the various capital city-based newspapers. So
about the mining tax, so the state angle, if you like.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess the state papers didn't feel that it was worth the wait compared to some of the state or local-based issues going on this morning. For example, the Hobart Mercury still running with Princess Mary, given her background there. But certainly there was a lot of anticipation in the material that was in about the mining tax today.
All right, well, let's have a look at the Financial Review. That's one of your front pages. And they've got actually quite a strong story there, because they've got a number of high-profile people who have gone on the record very stringently criticising that tax.
Correct. And yeah, so I think it's fair to say that their coverage is, let's say, not so much in favour of the mining tax. And they've concentrated that story on two aspects. One, the impending bun fight at state level over the funding arrangements, and also the disquiet among key economic advisors.
Yeah, and some key economic advisors, one of whom emanates from the Henry Review Committee, and it was that review that actually came up with the MRRT, or an earlier form of it, in the first place. And the description they use there is a dog's breakfast. And also not negotiating directly with the states, and therefore not sorting out the whole issue of state royalties, Michael.
Which the states can increase, but I think there's some trigger in the legislation that allows the Commonwealth to strip some infrastructure funding from... See, it's just see how complicated it is.
But also, isn't that lovely? You know, that's what you want. You want to get involved in a bun fight with the states about that and be stripping, you know, money from them as punishment for raising royalties. Excellent.
Well, the Fin Review aside, Virginia, in the Oz on page 4, David Uren's op-ed piece is centred on the exposure of the budget balance to mineral prices, and he obviously reminds us about the risk of a big black hole in the budget if particularly iron ore prices decline in the near future.
Well, also, in the short term, there's that $100 million black hole, which the government says it's filled, but we're not yet aware of the details, care of those concessions they gave to Andrew Wilkie.
Also, if you've got some time, I recommend Brian Tui's analysis piece in the Financial Review as well today, which looks at just how many initiatives and how many funding policies have to now be paid for by the mining tax. And this mining tax, it's got to be a magic pudding, doesn't it? Just has to keep on giving.
The superannuation levy, and there are various other tax relief measures.
That's right.
Can we move on to something less complicated? What's next?
No. Well, just as complicated in the Australian, I think, today.
Well, I've gone for one that centres on the sector in which I'm in, and that's the... well, this is a nice exercise in the political economy of universities. Yeah. So this is the story from the lead page of the higher ed section in the Australian, and yesterday Universities Australia came out and disparaged the claims of the government about the economic health of the overall sector. Yeah, so there's been some machinations about funding for universities in the recent past. This year, the sector looks set to, or projecting anyway, huge surpluses in comparative to the recent few years.
Right.
And I guess this is a nice little lesson about never sitting on a surplus. Public servants know this just all too well. And certainly in my time in the sector, I've heard some stories of frightful waste across the sector, especially when the existence of surpluses late in the financial year or the calendar year lead to the threat of future cuts.
Right, and the rush to spend that.
Yeah. However, Michael, my experience is that the current surpluses have been earned through lots of effort, not to mention significant reform. And in the sector, we feel that we're really scrounging around to try and cut corners on things that are very wasteful, to concentrate on the things that we like to do, teaching and research. So it doesn't surprise me about the back and forth between Universities Australia and the Education Minister.
Let's go to the front page of The Age, which has a sporting flavour on its front page.
Yeah, we're right in your department now.
Absolutely, and on previous occasions here, Michael once noted that I've shown somewhat of restraint here. But a couple of items here. I won't say too much about the initial one. That's the reporting of Pat Cummins as the man of the match against South Africa.
Yeah, now,
these are events of more than 24 hours ago, admittedly, and Michael was reminding us about the initiation of, or inauguration of his new nickname as Postman Pat yesterday. Yep. But of course, this event was too late for the newspapers to run with yesterday morning, so they've gone for a bit of a retrospective on it.
It's okay. You're allowed to mention that sporting matter because it's on the front page of the paper, so that gets you out of jail. What I just want to know though, reflect for us a moment on this bloke. What do you make of him? What do you put his great skill down to? What do you see when you watch him play? Well,
he's just a young firebrand, and we've seen, admittedly not on too many occasions, but I'm reminded of a 19-year-old Craig McDermott in 1985 against the West Indies in Melbourne. And often, sometimes these great debuts at a very young age are just down to that these guys don't know what pressure is. So they just go out and do their natural thing. So anyway, in terms of the commentary on the actual sporting angle of it, I'll leave to others. But there might be some interesting commentary in the coming days about whether this might provide somewhat of an early vindication of the recent reforms in the national team setup inaugurated by Cricket Australia. In fact, so early they haven't actually really occurred yet. Nevertheless, the winds of change are blowing in the national team setup, and I think it's a very promising sign in the wake of a long period where the general perception was that there wasn't enough reform.
I reckon too. And now the Australian talks about, how should I describe him now? The global citizen who is now Australia's new cricket coach.
So the appointment of Mickey Arthur. Now, Paul Kennedy was on before talking about this, and what I'd like to do is concentrate on the international trade economics angle. I've got a number of colleagues in trade economics, and as we always say in economics, that trade is a good thing. All countries are better off with more trade. Well, to that end, I think it's a great signal that the Australian sports governing bodies are sending by seeing their way cleared to appoint foreign coaches. And we've seen this before in basketball, in football with the two Dutch coaches and Holger Osijek, and even in rugby, Robbie Deans. I thought that was a great appointment for that signal. Now, maybe not everyone agrees that was the best appointment, but I still think it was a great signal. This could be considered, the cricket team, as the last bastion of protectionism with respect to national team coach appointments. So it's really good to see, and then perhaps we can pontificate to our cousins across the Tasman that perhaps they should be looking for foreign coaches, or relax their selection criteria on foreign coaches, and even to world football powers such as Germany, Brazil and Italy, that they should be considering the same thing.
A sporting trans-Pacific partnership,
absolutely,
so to speak.
Always good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
And while we're on sport, Paul Kennedy is indeed here, and Lee makes a good point. I mean, there should be, you know, it's a global age and sports are increasingly global.
As long as the coach is smart enough to work with the culture that he or she gets thrust into. There's been a couple of failed appointments from Australian cricketers that have gone over to India and Pakistan and been booted straight out after they try and sack all the stars. Anyway, that's leading the sport this morning, that Mickey Arthur appointment. He was open yesterday. He didn't want to buy into the selection, though, so we'll have to wait for the next few days to see just who's going to represent the Australian cricket.